Diane, welcome to the Cash Bar. We're back.
We're back.
We're back in the proper studio.
We're back in my studio.
Not my fake studio. I'm blending into the camouflage studio.
Look, if you're watching, then lean back. We're just going to lose you.
Disappear out of the
That's awesome.
Hey, you make friends wherever you go. You're
do.
a delightful personality. Has anybody ever told you that?
Everybody.
You're fun to talk to, fun to hang out with.
I'm pushy.
You're not pushy.
Thank you.
Maybe you are pushy. We're just going to get right into it. I don't think we're going to mess around too much.
All right.
Let's just do it. We have a very special guest that you arranged, that you found on your travels.
Yes.
You went to Memphis you did all of Tennessee a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
While you were there, you went to the legendary Sun Studios.
Yes.
You went on a tour.
Yes.
And you sweet talked the tour guide into coming on the Cash Bar.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And thank you very much for doing it. Our guest today is going to be Geoff Smith. He's got the coolest job in the world. He's a tour guide at the legendary Sun Studios, and he's been very gracious to come on our little show. Thank you, Geoff. Welcome to the Cash Bar.
So good to be here, guys.
Yeah, so at the end of the tour, which you did a wonderful job, by the way, you had the little tip thing out, and I had my son put in a 20, and I put in a Rock the Cash Bar sticker, and I was just like,
love it.
Hi.
Actually put it on our coffee machine, so
yay.
Rock the Cash Bar is there forever.
Rock the Cash Bar is up in Sun Studio?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's on
and
the pole up front, and it's on our coffee machine.
Oh,
we're
wow.
really deem important stickers to go, so
I'm going to be walking a little taller.
Yeah, I slapped it on a few. There's like tons of stickers outside the pole and on the side of Sun Studio, and I had them all in my purse. So
yeah. Rock the Cash Bar is howling naked and getting neuter, are we?
Yes, we are.
All right.
All right. So Ben and I were saying we're really going to let Geoff lead this one. There was no point in us doing all the research when you're the expert. So we wanted this to be, and you wanted this to be a Sam Phillips Sun Records, Sun Studio heavy episode. And so we're going to let you start. But before you start, I want to ask at first, what led you to becoming a tour guide at Sun Studio?
Yeah. What's your superhero origin story?
I wish it was a lot cooler than it's about to be. So, growing up in Memphis, of course, you don't really appreciate, what's around you until you get older, and especially being a musician, you start realizing like there's such a music heavy history city like Memphis is, like how important all these places are, like Stax, Sun, Royal, Ardent, like all these iconic studios. And then, when I was like 19 or 20, one of my best friends, who ended up becoming one of my best friends' name was Matt Rossbang, who at the time was the assistant engineer at Sun Studio. And so throughout the years, I'd always go up there and hang out with him and, joke around with him. And they eventually became, a freelance engineer and won 2 Grammys with Jason Isbell doing 2 of his records, being an engineer, and then is opening up his own state-of-the-art studio here in Memphis. Still one of my best friends. But anyway, so like over the years, I've known all these people because of Matt, like just going up to Sun and just hanging out. And about 4.5 years ago, one of my best friends who's in a band that I have here in town, he was a operations manager at Sun and had been at Sun for a long time. And he just happened to be like, hey, there's a tour guide position opening up. So would you like to, take it? I was like, possibly. I was a music teacher at a school of rock franchise here in Memphis, and I was like really invested into that.
My son's in that.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I love School of Rock. It's such a great program. I wish I had that growing up. I sucked for a long time before I got to where I was. But just so happened the timing was right, and I joined January 2017, and haven't looked back. And it's becoming a tour guide there. I've met more people in my first week working there from around the world than I had my entire life. It was
that's cool.
And not to mention all the famous people that you never thought you'd ever get a chance to meet. It's like, the list goes on and on and on. It's like, and people want to know what there, which is very disconcerting. It's like, I'm just some weird dude from Memphis. Like, why do you want to know what I know? But it's been a really great journey. It's been a lot of ups and downs, but for the majority, being a tour guide at Sun, people ask me all the time, do you ever get tired of saying the same thing over and over and over again? I was like, no. It's like, for me, because I like, when people come in and take a tour at Sun, it's like doing it for the first time every time for me. It's like, because people are getting a different experience. Most people have not ever been there. So you're like, for me, it was like telling them for the first time ever, me being a tour guide, it's like almost like a really cool version of Groundhog Day. You know, it's like because people are going to really, really enjoy it and appreciate it, even though you might have, you know, been there 5 days straight and have been doing it over and over and over again. Your voice is about to blow out, but still, it's like I give the same tour every single time because you just don't know who's going to be there, who's going to extremely enjoy what you're about to tell them. So it's like I've never strayed from, you know, giving an incredible tour, unless it's like a bunch of like, you know, middle school kids that could care less to be there.
Right.
That's beside the point. But again, a majority of the people that come through, they just are so enamored by the story. It is such a incredible, fun story to tell, and it's an iconic piece of music history that, you know, be able to tell it in that place. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. You know, it really
I mean, that's a true like holy house. It's got to be overwhelming for people to be in that studio.
It is. It really is.
The U2 documentary Rattle and Hum when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And watching Bono and the boys come through Sun Studio, and you know, like they're playing with BB King, and they're the biggest band in the world at that time, and they walk into Sun Studios, and you just see them just melt, you know.
Yeah, and that was. I wish I could have, you know, been a fly on the wall during those sessions, because there's like a lot of special things that happened for that session. I think it was Jimmy Iovine that was the producer, maybe for that.
Yeah, it was.
But I mean, we have the original Akai 12-track console sitting on the wall in our record shop that they cut those 3 songs onto, and it went to VHS tape, which is hilarious because at the time that was state of the art. Now it's the most obsolete piece of recording equipment out there, you know.
Right.
So, and we also have Larry Mullen Jr.'s drum set, the drum set in U2 in Rattle and Hum. That's in our studio, and it's been there since Larry Mullen Jr. bought it. He bought it at the Memphis drum shop in town. It's a 68 Ludwig kit, and he used it on the session and left it there as a gift. So, and that's been our session house drum kit ever since 1987, which is a really cool thing. So everybody past Larry Mullen Jr. has played on that drum kit, which is pretty neat.
It's really cool. I sent you that picture. Like, he's a huge U2 fan, and my husband was like, take a picture of that, send that to Ben. Yeah, it was so cool. So, you know, you guys were the first. We flew into town the day that we toured Sun Studio. We got into town that day. You're the first thing we did on our whole Tennessee trip.
Yes.
And so, you know, the next morning we did Graceland, and we did the full VIP tour at Graceland. And, you know, we did a bunch of stuff after that. And my husband is like, that Sun Studio was still my favorite because it's still an active place, and because you, like the way you said, not much inside of it has changed from the original, like in the recording room, and you get to stand like on the X of like where he stood. And, you know, the Graceland is great, but you know, it's very touristy and you can only see a little bit of it. But my husband, I can't describe it well, but he was saying there was just a better feeling of being like, this is the place where this happened. He said it was just his favorite tour, his favorite part of the trip.
Yeah, it's really special, especially when you have the personal touch of actually having a tour guide. That's like a really big game changer for a lot of people. You know, you're taking the work out of it for everybody, you know.
Right.
So when you do like a self-guided tour, it's like there's a lot to focus on, and then with a guided tour, it's like I'm focusing on this one thing, and it basically, I don't know. It's just such a cool, because there's no other guided tour in Memphis besides a VIP tour at Graceland. But yeah, everything else is completely self-guided. So
yeah. Well, let's get started. Where do you want to start? Where does the story of Sun Records start with the way you give your tour?
Sure. So it all starts with Sam Phillips. He grew up on a farm in Florence, Alabama, and it reads like his family grew up. I think they were sharecroppers, if I'm not mistaken. It's not super, poor, but not super rich at the same time. And Sam went to school. He got into radio engineering a lot, or he wanted to be into radio. One of my favorite stories, reading about Sam, what shifted his course to becoming what he eventually became. Him, I think some of his brothers and some of his cousins were on their way to Dallas, Texas for a big tent revival. It was because Sam, I read, was wanting to become an evangelical preacher at some point in his life, and they were on the way to this big tent revival, and they had stopped over in Memphis on their way to Dallas, and they went by Bill Street, and it reads that Sam was so enamored by all the music on Bill Street, which was all blues, and raw gospel, like really cool stuff that like he told his cousins and his brothers, like, you guys go on without me. I'm going to stay here. You pick me up on the way back. And that's what changed Sam's course of like, his life. He was like, this is what I want to do. I don't know what it is I want to do, but I want to be involved with this. So that's when he got into like radio. He was a radio engineer. So he was like behind the scenes kind of guy. So he did like all the technical stuff. And eventually his wife, Becky, and I don't know if Jerry and Knox were born at this point, but they moved his family to Memphis and started working at a WREC, which is a radio station that broadcasts out of the basement of the Peabody Hotel. He was around 27 when he, I guess, started working at WREC. But it was funny because like that radio station was not what he was into, or it was mostly playing like pop and like, like ballads and stuff like that. But again, he had to like cut his teeth somehow. And eventually, I guess all the stars aligned, and he had gotten, loans from a bunch of people, and him and his fellow coworker, Marion Keisker. So Marion was also, had been in radio forever. And she was, at the time when Sam and her were working together, she was basically, she was writing, producing, and directing they call them the Starland ballroom shows that were on the rooftop of the Peabody Hotel. So just like a big thing, back in the day. So it was like a big social event. So
we stayed there at the Peabody, and we're reading about like these huge social events that would happen on that roof. Yeah,
they did them like every night of the week. So it was like a big deal. And because like back then hotels were like the centerpiece for like social gatherings, hence like radio stations and all that. So Sam would be the one that would like record all of these, and knowing Marion Keisker's background and also their, their work relationship, it just made sense. Like Marion's, I guess her approach to like complete day-to-day, like, inner workings of like a studio or radio station, like is what made Sam kind of like, enamored with her to like open up this new venture. Because, Sam was he wasn't a silver-tongued devil, but he was very assured of himself, and his foresight was so, I guess, intoxicating. That like Marion was just like, I believe in this vision that he's got, and Sam wanted to build a studio, for recording gospel and blues musicians that was not here in Memphis. I think the studios in Memphis at the time are mostly doing like radio jingles and stuff like that. So it's nothing that was as prominent, offering a space for blues and gospel, because even though that was like what was like huge and rampant in Memphis at the time, it's like nobody wanted to, take that risk. And Sam did. And he found this like, in one of my favorite like interviews, like Sam, like later on, Sam and Marion were being interviewed about like the location of where 706 Union Avenue, Memphis Recording Services. And like Sam does this like huge elaborate things like, well, I saw the building, and then the heavens opened up and the sunlight shined down on 706 Union Avenue. I knew that was the place where I was going to open my studio. And Marion was like, it was the cheapest place we could afford, that kind of stuff. So Sam got a bunch of loans from, had some investors, invest into what, would eventually become the Memphis Recording Service. And so about the last few months of 1949, Sam and Marion and some carpenters like build out the room. I was told and read that, Sam got the initial idea for the general specs of the studio out of a popular science magazine back in the 40s, which was like the general spec of like a tracking floor for a studio. Obviously, every room is different. So ours definitely is a lot more different than a lot of other studios, especially at that time. Like our ceilings are like, he built into the ceiling. So if you ever see pictures of Sun or, Memphis Recording Service, the ceiling is, does a wave. So for two reasons: one, for acoustics; two, for it was cheaper for him to build into the ceiling than put in a drop ceiling. Okay. So like all the shapes of the wall were per his design. So, this is before, modern EQ or like, so he was basically shaping the room for acoustics and frequency. So anywhere you put a microphone, I mean, that's, anyone can build a studio now for the same reason, but like he didn't have like all this outboard gear, like the stuff that we have now, or even like when the next decade came around, it was very minimal. So, you know, every part of that room, there is a cut and boost in, you know, frequency, whether it's low, mid, or high. It's like, so it was all about where you place the mics. And then you would have to basically record or mix on the fly because it's all one track. So anyways, you know, so Sam opened up the studio in 1950, and there were some pretty lean years from like 1950 to 1954, you know, and while Sam was like, those first 2 years, Sam was just a recording studio. So him and Marion, it was just the two of them for that entire amount of time. And it took a while for, you know, Sam to earn the, I guess, the trust of all these African-American artists that were recording blues and gospel, because, you know, no one, you know, down here knew, you know, we're heavily segregated, you know, in the 50s here in Memphis.
Yeah.
So when, you know, these African-American artists hear about this, you know, white guy in a business suit recording blues and gospel, a lot of people were very skeptical about that. But eventually a few of them, you know, a few artists eventually succumbed and were like, well, I'm going to see what it's all about. And it was all, you know, word of mouth at that point. You know, it was like, so, you know, it just started like snowballing. But those first few years, it was, you know, Sam had made a few, you know, he would do a bunch of custom recordings, and like also to keep the lights on, he would do like mobile recordings, which was like state of the art back then. He had like a little mobile cutting lathe and a recorder, and he'd go to like people's like ballerina recitals or like graduations or Christmas dinners and record them. And then you could have like a master acetate of that event, which sounds ridiculous now, but back then it was like cutting edge, you know? So that would like make a little bit of extra money. But so the story goes like, you know, those first few artists coming into Sun, you know, people like B.B. King and Roscoe Gordon Jr. and Howlin Wolf, you know, it took a little bit of time. B.B. King recorded some of his earliest music there, and then eventually would get signed with RPM Modern Records, that it was ran by the Bahari brothers out of LA. And so Sam became what's called a studio that offers speculation deals for major labels. So a major label would have an artist come in, the label would pay the studio for the time, and then that session would be produced on the label and then go out to the world or what have you. So Sam would only be paid for the session time. So he never got paid for any royalties or publishing, anything like that. Because what I read is like Sam did not want to get involved in that because he was still holding down a job at WREC, working, you know, a day job, and then being a studio at night. So he didn't have time to like fully invest into that. One of my favorite stories is reading about like Howlin Wolf. So Sam is, you know, gave Howlin Wolf his start, and Howlin Wolf is like one of the best blues artists ever lived. And Sam is credited as saying that Howlin Wolf was the greatest discovery that he'd ever made. Wow. And, you know, 300 pounds, 6'8", got his start when he was 38 years old. So if there's any inspiring artists that are listening, don't worry, you can get your start after you're 35 years old. If Howlin Wolf did it, you can do it.
I think we say that in the comedy world about Rodney Dangerfield.
Exactly.
Important to note that Howlin Wolf did it in the early 50s. You're going to have to be a very, very cute and young looking 38-year-old to make it these days.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so unfortunate. But yeah, so like, and this is what started veering Sam onto the path of like really producing and like working with artists, was like with Howlin Wolf. You know, the song Moanin' at Midnight, which was like a big hit for Chess with Howlin Wolf. You know, I read that Sam spent so much time with Howlin Wolf in the studio, like working at this song, like play it faster, play it slower, let's do this arrangement, let's do this arrangement, until they got the version that you actually hear that Chess put out. So like, and when that happened, you know, Sam, you know, had a #1 record out for the world to hear, that he had nothing to do with just being a studio. So even though he, like, I don't know if he helped write it, he definitely produced every aspect of that song and didn't get any compensation for it.
Wow.
And that same goes for the Jackie Brinson and his Delta Cats, a story about the broken amplifier that became the distortion, the first known distortion out there. He had 2 #1 hits out on the radio. He had Rocket 88 and Moment at Midnight with 2 different artists that were put out on Chess. And Sam had a handshake agreement with Leonard Chess, the same with the Bahari brothers, that, you know, those handshake agreements don't ever go well, because they, end up, said person gets screwed because the other one doesn't honor it, what have you. And with these disagreements is what, finally inspired Sam to open up the Sun Record Company in 1952. He was tired of dealing with shady agreements with people like Leonard Chess and the Bahari brothers and probably countless other people. And he's like, he wanted, even though he set out to not be a record company, with seeing like all of the shady business that these people were doing, is like, I need to have more control with what I'm doing. So he quit his job at the radio station, opened up the Sun Record Company in 1952. And it took a while, even then, for him to like find his first hit with the Sun Record Company. It was like so much, like from 1952 to 1954. Again, those are some, very dark years for Sam. He actually did a lot of electroshock treatment to calm his nerves. He did like 12 different treatments, like which that was, I guess, state of the art, not necessarily as a new kind of experimental treatment to like treat your nerves. And he did that because he was like on the verge of nervous breakdown every time, because he was trying to keep this studio alive and keep his dream alive, and also like have the money to like pay Mary. I mean, he was probably definitely scraping every penny he could to like keep this business alive. And it wasn't,
they really pushed that in that CMT TV show. They really show like how much his wife was like, I want you to stop doing this. And Marion was like, no, this is your dream. Even after the shock therapy, she's like, no, we're going to keep doing this.
Yeah, I think, Becky was, she was a, very much a diehard Sam Phillips fan. She's like, she was, loyal through and through up until, they both passed. And so was Marion. So like Sam and Marion and Becky had a very, they never had an estranged relationship. They had a mutual understanding of each other, because they both knew Sam in two different lights, Yeah. But so Sam actually started seeing real money. Excuse me. He found his first hit with the Sun Record Company with Rufus Thomas of Stax fame, of all people. Rufus was a very popular radio DJ back in the early mid 50s. He was actually a radio DJ for the very first all African-American radio stations, WDIA. And that was a really big deal, just in history alone.
Yeah.
And, because B.B. King had a radio spot on there, like all these blues artists, Howlin Wolf, Roscoe Gordon, and they were all like, that was a very popular thing in the 50s and in the 60s in Memphis. And so Rufus met up with Sam, course would come very first for the Sun Record Company. There's a song called Bearcat, which is a call and response song to Hound Dog. So saying, you ain't nothing but a bearcat, so you ain't nothing but a hound dog. And that was a song that Big Mama Thornton had released 2 weeks prior for Peacock Records in Houston, Texas. And it was a Lieber and Stoller song. So, with that being so close to the release, because Sam knew what he was doing, it was eventually would be copyright infringement. And like, Sam was just seeing how far he can go with it. And he made a lot of money on Bearcat, but eventually Peacock Records found out. They're like, so cease and desist, and here's a lawsuit for, I think it was around $1,400, which today's money would have been around $15,000. So that hit Sam pretty hard. But again, he was like, I'm just going to try it, see how far I can get with it. He actually made money doing it, and then again got sued. So did he make money? Probably not.
How much shock therapy do you do the day you get served with a $15,000 lawsuit?
Probably had a
skating over that a little bit. Like, it's just such a weird thing to like. I know that's the 50s and people don't know, but it's just be like, I'm just feeling kind of sad today. I'm going to go hook my nipples up to the car battery. You sit tight. I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just got slapped with a $1,500 lawsuit. All right, well, I guess the mental ward will have me for another night.
I can't pay you right now because I'm in the hospital getting zapped. So
it was
I pay you Tuesday, but I got to stick a fork in the socket all day today. But
yeah, it was crazy. Sam was like so inventive and so like just gung-ho about his vision that he didn't let even like being broke like falter that. He wanted to see it through even if it killed him. And then he, after the lawsuit with Bearcat, he found his next group of hits, was probably my favorite all-time story to tell, It was with 5 prisoners doing time at the Tennessee State Penitentiary in Nashville. Coincidentally enough, they called themselves the Prisonaires. And the Prisonaires were so famous around the time that Sam found out about them that, they were doing like weekly radio shows like twice a week on different radio stations around Nashville. And at the time, there was the governor, Frank Clement, was the governor of Tennessee, and he was doing his whole reelection campaign was based on prison reform, and the Prisonaires were like a favorite band of his and would use him as like his campaign band. So Sam was like, this is a really, really cool opportunity to like get these guys more nationally known. And he actually bothered the warden at the Tennessee State Penitentiary so much that he finally gave in. He's like, fine, I'll arrange for these guys to be transported over to Memphis and record some sessions for Sun. And they came over in a van or a car with an armed guard and cut, they're all chained together, and they cut a bunch of hits for Sun. They did songs like Prisoner's Prayer, Love and Tenderly, Just Walking in the Rain, which would be a very famous song that a British artist by the name of Johnny Ray would make famous.
This is the governor of Tennessee in the 50s actually doing something like helping out convicts, like actually doing something to get the convicts message out. When you said prison reform, I thought, oh, that's not good. There's going to be more bars, more guards, right?
No, it was like basically like a rehabilitation thing, I think. And like, because, he wouldn't just like use like a bunch of prisoners, like to be like more prison guards, more jails, and, what's great is like the success that the Prisonaires had. The governor, Frank Clement, actually had them play at his estate over 200 times, and he eventually granted all of them a full pardon from prison.
Wow.
It was really, really cool. Eventually, unfortunately, some of them went back into prison. A lot of old habits die hard. And so the Prisonaires had a really cool story. I actually had the pleasure of having Johnny Bragg, who was the lead singer of the Prisonaires, his daughter. I've had the pleasure of giving her a tour at Sun twice, and she's such a sweet lady. And
that's really cool.
Yeah. So, so eventually, while Sam is in the midst of still hanging on to this dream of blues and gospel, eventually a young 18-year-old Elvis Presley would finally find out about, the Memphis Recording Service. Because at the time in 53, when all these songs are coming out, Elvis was in high school or just graduating, and Sam also offered what was called a custom recording service. So you can pay $4 and come into the Memphis Recording Service and cut 2 songs, and you can take that with you, like a master acetate. And $4 probably in 54 was, or 53 was, God, I don't know, probably like $70 or something like that, maybe.
About the cost of a pair of
so
blue suede shoes.
At the time. Exactly. At the time, the Prisonaires were like Elvis's favorite band, and because they were getting such like huge notoriety. And when he found out that the Prisonaires actually recorded in Memphis, like right down the street from where he lived, he's like, I got to find out, go check this place out. And so when he was on a lunch break one day, he just graduated high school from Humes here in town, and he had taken on one of his very first jobs, and he was a delivery truck driver for a machinist company at the time. And he stopped by the Memphis Recording Service on a lunch break and was met by Marion Keisker, Sam's secretary. And like the story goes like, Elvis comes in, and, Marion, he was like, I was wondering if I can, I have $4. I was wanting to, record a custom session. And she's like, yeah, sure. And Marion asks like, well, what do you sound like, young man? And Elvis says, well, ma'am, I sound like nobody. And she was like, okay, it's like weird flex, but okay, well, that's fine. Let's see what you got. So, she says, because Marion can also run all the equipment in the studio. She has a radio background, so she knows how to operate all this stuff. So she records Elvis. The first 2 songs that he ever cut, which was one was a Connie Francis song called My Happiness. The B-side was a song called It's When Your Heartaches Begin. So the story goes that he recorded him for his mother, but the actual truth of it was that he wanted to hear how he sounded on an actual recording.
Right.
Yeah.
He had this cheap dime store guitar that Gladys, his mother, bought for him, and cut 2 songs and then left. Elvis took a copy, Marion saved a copy, and she knew that she heard something special, so she saved it for Sam, to play for Sam for whenever Sam would return to the studio.
Where is that record now?
Well, Jack White owns one of the master acetates and paid like 350 grand for it, and
Whoa.
releases those songs on an actual 45 through Third Man Records. So you can actually
wow.
buy that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Songs on thirdmanrecord.com or records.com for like $8. So yeah, and I don't know where the other master acetate went. We do have a copy of it in our cafe at Sun, but I don't know if that's the second copy. It might be a copy of a copy,
Right.
but it's like an original master acetate. So when Sam finally gets back, is like Marion is like, look, you gotta hear this guy. I've just recorded. You're gonna love him. So Sam's like, all right, let me hear him. And here's what Elvis just cut, and Sam hated it. He's like, this is garbage. I don't, because it's like, why would I be interested in this? Because like it's like a pop ballad. He's
Right.
like, it sounds like anything that I would hear on the radio right now. So he like just dismissed it. And it would actually take about a year until Elvis would be invited back for his very first like real recording session. So Elvis would do like a bunch of odd jobs at the studio because like he was just so adamant, even though Sam hated what he recorded, like he would come up there and like sweep the floors or mop or like take out the trash, and basically was like a huge nuisance to Sam.
It's so weird to think of somebody like kicking Elvis around the room, like Elvis getting some coffee.
Yeah, it was definitely Sam. He was like, Elvis would always like try to chime in and like Sam back, get out of here, Elvis. I don't got time for you. One of my favorite stories, it was a Prisonaires story. That Prisonaires came into the session, and at this time, like Elvis was like obsessed with the Prisonaires and like was just like, maybe like sweeping or mopping in the background. And Johnny Bragg was having trouble with the dictation of one of his songs, like trying to sing it. And they were just like going nowhere, just constantly hitting a wall. And finally Elvis was like, raised his hands like, Mr. Phillips, I think maybe I can help. And, Sam's like, get out of here, Elvis. I told you not to, it's like, don't chime in on that. And Johnny Bragg was like, well, with all due respect, Mr. Phillips, I'd like to hear what the young kid has got to say. Sam's just like, fine, whatever. So Johnny and Elvis went in Marion's office, and like Elvis helped Johnny with like his dictation with whatever he's having trouble with. And then they went back in the studio and they cut the song and they got it instantly.
Wow.
And still Sam was like, I don't care. I'm not going to give Elvis that credit. It's like, of course, it's like Elvis just getting constantly beat down. So long story short, the next story in this scenario goes like a year had passed since Elvis's first recording. So the year's like 1954. It's like June or July. Elvis at this point has started getting songs in from other songwriters all around the country, and he had just gotten in a few songs from Nashville that this certain label wanted, or the people wanted a band to record these songs. So he hired two musicians, Scotty Moore and Bill Black. They were part of a band called the Starlight Rangers or something like that. There was like a country band, and they were like, upright bass and electric guitar, and they're like the hot stuff in Memphis at the time. And so, Sam had needed a frontman or lead singer for the band, and Marion, after like just constant, like a year of just bugging Sam, just like, hey, what about Elvis Presley? And Sam was finally, his walls had been worn down. He's like, fine, Lord help me, call Elvis, get him up here. Let's just get this done. I'm tired of it. I just want to get it done. And at the time I read that Elvis was a movie usher downtown, and he got in a call. I guess his mother, he called, Marion called his home, and then Gladys picked up, then called the movie theater and told Elvis like, hey, Sam Phillips needs you down at the studio. And he ran the entire mile from downtown Memphis to the studio nonstop because he knew this was his last shot. So finally he gets in there out of breath, and Sam's like, all right, well, here we go. Let's see what you got. And so, Scotty Moore, Bill Black, and Elvis are working out the songs, and, Sam's recording them, and it's just not working. It's like, it's like the same, vicious cycle that Sam's been dealing with Elvis. And he's like, even with having like a hot group like Scotty Moore and Bill Black behind him, it's like, it's like, no, it's like, this ain't working, guys. I'm going to go have a cigarette. I'm going to take a break. We've been in it for too long, and nothing's going anywhere. And Bill and Scotty are just like, yeah, we're probably about to pack it up. And then that's when Elvis is like, this is my shot. I'm blowing it. I need to do something. So he picked up his guitar and started like running around the studio with all this nervous energy, playing an obscure blues song by an artist by the name of Arthur Big Boy Crudup, and it was a song called That's All Right, which would end up being That's All Right Mama. So but this way that Elvis was playing it, Scotty and Bill were like, all right, we'll play with you again one more time. And so Elvis is playing it like this blues song, a lot faster, a lot more, I guess would it become rock and roll. And Sam was, and probably outside of the control room, and he was like, he hears them doing this, and he runs in and goes, what is that? And he's like, it's just an Arthur Crudup song called, That's All Right. It's like, and Sam's like, play it faster. And they play it faster, and he goes, faster, faster. And they kept playing it faster and faster. And finally goes, all right, that's it. And he runs in and hits record. And that's the version that you hear now, is this version of That's All Right. So they cut it, took a few takes. And then the B-side of that is Blue Moon of Kentucky, which is a public domain song, right. Which is the same concept, like super fast paced version of Blue Moon of Kentucky. And that, they cut that in a few takes. And then Sam would bring that to a guy I haven't mentioned yet, a guy by the name of Dewey Daddy-O Phillips, who was a popular radio DJ here in Memphis back in the 50s. He had a popular radio show called Red Hot and Blue. And Dewey was not related to Sam. They were just very close friends, drinking buddies. And Dewey had popularized a very popular radio show called Red Hot and Blue that turned from a 15-minute radio spot into a 3-hour-long spot. It was huge here in the Mid-South, and Dewey played everything that Sam ever put out or ever recorded, which is a pretty swell deal to have, especially in the height of payola, back in the 50s with, just greasing palms to get, music played on, radio stations, because Dewey believed in Sam so much and what he was doing. It's Dewey broke artists like B.B. King, Howlin Wolf, Roscoe Gordon Jr., Ike Turner, all of them. So having this different thing come out of the norm of what the Sun Record Company was, that was a big deal. So Dewey played That's All Right. I think it was July 2nd or 3rd, 1954. And after he played that song for the very first time, the switchboard's lighting up, people are calling in frantic, who was that you were just playing? Who was singing That's All Right? And there's this young kid, Elvis Presley. So, and
that's insane that everybody responded so much to someone's nervous desperation last chance.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Worked.
Yeah. Worked. Literally the guy emptying the garbage cans.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so crazy. And if it wasn't for Marion, constantly, telling Sam about Elvis, and that first step, and then the second step of Elvis being running around playing his version of That's All Right. Then that's what Sam latched onto, because that was a style of music that had yet been heard yet, in his ears, and for the most part, the world, because then Sam latched on it as that he's this is what I want to do now. So his whole focus shifted to this new version of speeding up blues and this country aspect, in which would eventually turn into rock and roll.
Yeah.
So after Dewey plays That's All Right, he plays it 14 times in his 3-hour broadcast. It's crazy. And then he sees how quickly, or Sam sees how quickly that this song has caught on, and actually signs Elvis, takes him into Taylor's Cafe, the restaurant that's next to the Memphis Recording Service, and signs Elvis to a 3-year recording contract with the Sun Record Company. And they would go on to cut, 5 or 4 other records, 4 45s, 2 songs apiece. So total 10 songs. So he did Milk Cow Blues Boogie, it was a Midnight Train, Mystery Train, I'm Left, You're Right, She's Gone, Trying to Get Next to You. There's a bunch of other songs. And I think Mystery Train was his last session there before Sam would actually sell Elvis's contract to RCA. And at the time, he was also Elvis was starting to get more popular in the region, and also he's getting some national notoriety. He was doing the Louisiana Hayride and all these big spots, and also trying to shop Elvis around to other major labels, because obviously Sam was still small time. And eventually RCA Victor in Nashville caught wind of Elvis and put in some offers, and Sam didn't really like the offers, and eventually RCA would come back with a $35,000 offer to buy out Elvis's contract. And then $35,000 in 1955 would be around $353,000 today. And that at the time was the most that anybody would, any record label would spend on an artist. I think Ray Charles was like the highest paying artist at the time. So this was like a big jump because RCA was like, this is something totally different, something that can catch on, something that can be big. And they were right, you know?
Yeah.
And then that's when Elvis went to superstardom, you know? And with the money that Sam had made from that deal, I mean, he cleared his debt, hired more people, and then also was finally able to turn the Sun Record Company into an international label. And that was what would eventually pave the way for all the other artists that would, you know, made their mark. You know, next in line was Carl Perkins. Carl Perkins would record the very first million selling hit for the Sun label with the song Blue Suede Shoes. So he wrote it, recorded it before Elvis, and sold more copies than Elvis, although Elvis made it more famous.
Right.
So when Blue Suede Shoes came out, which was written by Carl, but although Sam owned the publishing for it, which, you know, record companies are awesome. Really. So it's funny when Blue Suede Shoes came out, RCA was like furious at Sam. They're like, you sold us the wrong guys. Like, we wanted this song because it's a lot more popular than anything Elvis had put out yet.
Well,
And like, and Sam's like, no, I sold you Elvis. That's who you wanted. That's who you got. Blue Suede Shoes and Carl Perkins are mine. If you want Elvis to, like, you know, cover this song, that's totally fine, but it's going to cost you. And eventually RCA did, but they had to pay out royalties and publishing to Sam and Carl for Elvis to be able to cover Blue Suede Shoes. And now when Elvis did Blue Suede Shoes, that definitely put Elvis or Carl Perkins on the map. And Carl is credited as saying, Elvis covering Blue Suede Shoes is the best thing ever happened to me. Because it's true, you know, they were like very close friends, you know, that put Carl on the map, you know, and eventually, you know, all these other artists would be lined up, you know, so you had Carl, and then shortly after Carl came Johnny Cash, you know, and Johnny's story is awesome. You know, it's not as elaborate as Walk the Line portrayed it to be. The story goes like with Johnny, he camped outside of the studio waiting for for Sam to get back from a work trip, and he finally shows up, and, you know, Sam's like, here's this, you know, derelict on my sidewalk, you know, is Johnny Cash, and it's like, does some stuff. I was like, Mr. Phillips, my name is J.R. Cash. I was wondering if you have time to listen to some of my songs. And Sam like kind of looks him up and down. Is like, all right, man, let's see what you got. And he brings him in the studio, and the rest is history. But like, you know, going back real quick to like with Sam selling, you know, Elvis's contract, he also, not a lot of people know, but Sam was an early on investor in the Holiday Inn, so which was started here in Memphis, and which that ended up being a really big deal.
Good job, Sam.
Yes, Sam's foresight as a businessman was pretty brilliant. He also bought some radio stations, started the, him and Marion started the very first all-female radio station called WHER here in Memphis. And that was a huge deal, especially in the 50s. So yeah, Sam, you know, was starting to see like real money, then hired people like Bill Justice and Jack Clement, Cowboy Jack Clement, to like be songwriters and, you know, help produce other artists. So this was like, helped him alleviate a lot of that, because he started, you know, Sam wanted to, you know, enjoy some of his money, obviously. So he had like other people do, you know, the work for him. So like Jack Clement was an engineer, Bill Justice was like a songwriter and a producer for the sessions, and so was Jack. So, you know, they would, you know, do stuff for Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and Roy Orbison, who Roy got to start at Sun too. So like then like the floodgates start really opening, and for Sam and for the Sun Record Company, he started seeing, you know, like actual like money and actual, you know, press, and like this, it's just, you know, going to the top, you know. But Sun was always just a stepping stone for these artists to go on to bigger, better things. Sam did not want it to be like as big as like a rival like RCA or Chess or anything like that, because he's like, it's too much work, you know. So with the artists like, you know, Johnny Cash coming in, Johnny recorded probably the most hits for Sun. I mean, he was there for about 2.5 years, and then Johnny eventually got signed to Columbia Records. And, you know, Roy Orbison was only there for a very small footnote. He recorded like a few hits, but nothing as big as like what he would do with Monument Records with like Crying and Pretty Woman. But, you know, Jerry Lee was like, that was like the pinnacle of Sun's success, is when Jerry Lee recorded Great Balls of Fire and a Whole Lot of Shaking Going On. And those were like the two biggest selling hits for the Sun Record Company ever. Nothing else.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, in the first week of Great Balls of Fire being out, it sold over 1 million copies, which is huge in 1957. So Sam had he's like, that's it.
Yeah.
I've done it. I did everything I set out to do, and that was a really big deal. And what's great is Sam, even though his whole, I guess his whole thing shifted music wise, he still was he would record Roscoe Gordon Jr. up until 58 or 59, and all these other blues artists. He would still not stray away from his original vision of doing blues and gospel. And he also did a lot of awesome female artists like Barbara Pittman and the Miller sisters, and Memphis Ma Rainey. He recorded them and got them their start. And there was some really cool stuff out there, and which set Sam apart is the entire Sun catalog. You can listen to it, and every artist, every song is very unique. He was always looking for the most, what he called perfect imperfection. He wasn't looking for anything slick. He was looking for what was different, what was unique, what was would be deemed not good. He wanted that because it was unique. It wasn't this slick thing that everybody was going for during the, at that time. So, it was really, really, really cool. And he did so much for all these people. And yeah, I mean, he probably definitely did some shady business, stuff for these artists, because again, it's how record companies operate. It's they need to be recouped before you get recouped, So the whole story with Carl Perkins, Sam bought the first, he made a goal. It's he's if whoever sells the first 1 million hits for the Sun Record Company, I'm going to buy you a Cadillac. So he bought it for Carl Perkins, but he bought it with the money that Carl, obviously made. So it was it's kind of a backhanded.
Yeah.
Here's the keys to the car that you bought. I didn't. So things like that, obviously. But then when Sam's lease would start being up at, well, real quick before I get to that point. So obviously there is one really cool story that a lot of people know, and that's the $1 Million Quartet that happened at Sun. So I'll real quickly talk about that. So it happened December 4th, 1956. It was Carl Perkins' recording session. So Carl was recording a follow-up to Blue Suede Shoes with a song called Matchbox. Jerry Lee Lewis was a session piano player at the time, and was hired to be on the session. I think Fluke Holland for W.S. Holland was playing drums, so he had Carl's band with him. Elvis had he had been with RCA for a year, so Love Me Tender had just come out, and that was a really big hit for him. He was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he decided to come by the studio and be Elvis and just basically just derail the entire session. Hey, I'm Elvis. Hey guys. And of course, everyone's oh my God, Elvis is here. I'm sure Carl was probably.
Sorry, you broke up there. Carl was what?
Oh, sorry. I said Carl was probably pretty pissed, but regardless, so Sam had the foresight. He's all right, I see Johnny Cash, or not Johnny Cash. I see Carl Perkins in the room, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Elvis. I'm I'm going to call Johnny and see what he's up to. So Johnny had been Christmas shopping at that point, and I think I read that he didn't want to come down there, but Sam was I got a royalty check for you down here waiting for you. And John's all right, well, I'm going to come pick up some money. That was a lie. So he basically just lied to Johnny to get down here. And Johnny found it in all good fun. So they were all hanging around, just goofing off. And Sam had called the local newspaper, the Memphis Press Scimitar, and they came in and took pictures and and that's when the next page, or the next morning on the front page of the paper, said $1 Million Quartet. That's where the phrase was coined, was from the local newspaper. And after that, after newspapers left, Sam had the foresight also to hit record on the tape machines. And Jack Clement, who I mentioned earlier, was running the session. So secretly tells Jack Clement, go record these guys, and I'm going to go out there and just join in the fun. So they go on, and Sam and Jack secretly record the session for 4 hours, unbeknownst to everybody happening. So, and it wasn't until, people knew about the tapes, but legally Sam could not release it because RCA had the only major label artist at the time, Elvis, and that would have been a breach of contract it would have been, bad lawsuit for Sam if he would have released the MDQ session. So they actually came out after Sam died in 2003, and RCA released them about 75 minutes of that 4-hour session, which is really cool because those guys never, I don't think we're ever in the same room again recording ever. So that was like a pretty big deal. And of course, Sam had the foresight to do that. So
I would do that.
oh yeah, totally, same. But then after that, when it got closer to Sam's tenure there at 706 Union Avenue in 1958, with all this money Sam was making, he started building his own state-of-the-art studio because he knew his time was limited at the Memphis Recording Service. So it completed this new studio was completed in 1960. So he timed it perfectly because his lease was up at 706 Union Avenue, and then he moved his entire operation to what is now called, or always has been called, the Sam Phillips Recording Service. It was 639 Madison Avenue. At the time, it was the most state-of-the-art studio built in the world, all the way down to the brass doorknobs. It was insane. Like it had two studios, Studio A, Studio B. Studio A was about twice the size of the Sun Record Company studio, and instead of it press board everywhere like in the old studio, it was all corrugated sheet metal and like tiles. It was like this huge room to record the big band stuff or whoever, and it had all the state-of-the-art equipment, and also what was cool with Sam is like he didn't have an echo chamber at the old location of the Memphis Recording Service, and that was one thing he always wanted, was to have an echo chamber. It was a big deal to have studio to have, but he didn't have the room for it. So Sam in the early mid 50s actually pioneered what's called the slapback echo technique by buying a second tape machine. He had an Ampex 351 and had it in the rack, and basically would play the tape machine a few milliseconds behind like the track, the vocal track or whatever. And that's how you get that ping pong delay effect. It's because of the tape is playing either like a few milliseconds or like half a millisecond behind, so you can get like a shorter or longer like echo decay. And that's,
so he figured that out by himself.
He pioneered it just by messing around the studio. So he's the one that pioneered the slapback echo technique by just happenstance.
That's cool.
Which is like one of the most sought after used, people use slapback echo all the time. I mean, but when he built the new studio, he spared no expense. He built 3 echo chambers, echo chamber A, B, and C. And to this day were designed in a certain way that have been secret, that no one knows exactly how they have been designed. I know echo chamber A has about 6 or 7 seconds of decay. That's like almost infinite reverb. And then echo chamber B and C are like on the second floor, like hidden somewhere in the AC ducts. So they're all like active today. He built like the second floor, the 2 vinyl cutting rooms. So you can cut either stereo lacquers or mono lacquers. The mono room is still there. And the machine was custom built per his specs, and that machine still exists in the Sam Phillips Recording Service building. It just doesn't work anymore. It costs like $30,000 or $40,000 to get that up and running again, but it's still there, and it's really cool to like go and see that room still exists. And then on the 3rd floor of the building, the 2nd floor is mostly like accounting and publishing offices that has been gutted because it was really bad water damage over the years. But the 3rd floor is still intact. There's like very little of it's changed. Like Sam's office has like red shag carpet in it. He actually had a jukebox built into his desk, which is insane. The telephone still says like Knox Phillips, Stan Kessler, Scotty Moore. It's really crazy. And he had a barometer behind his desk instead of on the wall instead of a clock, because to check the humidity levels in the studio. It's dope. It's such a cool studio. So, and then that studio, the one that I give tours to, eventually became just dormant for like 25 years. And then Sam went on to he still had the Sun Record Company, and then he also had a subsidiary label called the Sam Phillips International label, and he put out like a lot of Charlie Rich, Jerry Lee Lewis, and a bunch of other artists on that label. And eventually Sam just he, like, as the recording technology was becoming more and more prevalent, he just got kind of disinterested. It's like now there's like more channels to record with. It's like I did everything with one channel.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want 16 channels. Like, this is too much. It's like, so he kind of knew when to stop. And he's like, when he sold the record company, Sun Record Company catalog to the Singleton family in Nashville in 1969 for around $1 million, which would have been around 6 or 7 million today. and he basically washed his hands of it. I'm sure he still like collected like a percentage of like royalties or publishing from that because his family is doing just fine.
Yeah.
And basically retired in the late 60s, early 70s from the music business, and let his sons run the studio and the label. He was just like, you guys know it as much as I do. I'm done. And one of my favorite stories post Sam and the Sun Record Company, the John Prine record Pink Cadillac was cut at the Sam Phillips recording service, and this is like mid late 70s when like records like that had an absurd budget. Some of it was used for cocaine, the other was used for whatever. So Knox Phillips, Sam's oldest son, was running the studio at the time, and John Prine was recording Pink Cadillac in there, but they were like recording at night and then like sleeping off during the day. So they do like these crazy benders during the day and night and just like record this record. So Sam was driving by his studio one morning, like early morning, and there's like all the lights on, in like the cars in the parking lot. He's like, calls up Knox, like, what the hell are you boys doing up there? It's like 3 or 4 in the morning. And like Knox, like, Sam, I'm sure they called him.
Yeah, Dad.
Yeah. I got a guy here. He's got the worst voice you have ever heard. It's like, all right, well, I'll come by tomorrow. I'll come by tonight. So Sam comes by and they're working on a song, Saigon, that's on Pink Cadillac. And like, Sam's like, just hits it off with John Prine, just loves him. It's like, this is, what you guys are doing are really cool. So like Sam actually brought himself out of retirement to produce and engineer 2 songs off of off of Pink Cadillac. One of them was Saigon. And this, my buddy Matt, who actually engineered the Tree of Forgiveness record of John Prine, his last record, was telling me the story that like they were in the Sam Phillips recording service and they were working on Saigon, and they were like, and Sam would be like, they'd play the song and he'd go like, kind of similar to like the That's All Right sessions, like, play it slower. They would go back and play it slower, and then Sam would go, do it again but slower. And they did it like 14 or 15 times to the point where they were getting sick of it, and like you could tell that they were like getting so annoyed with Sam. And then finally Sam goes, hits the talkback button on the console, goes, all right, now play it just a little bit faster than what you just did, and we're gonna and that's the version that you hear, is that version of Pink Cadillac. Wow. It's like little stuff like that. He cut it all to 3 tracks live, mixed it live, and then it was like, cool, I'm out, thanks guys. And that was the last song that Sam had ever. He brought himself out of retirement to do 2 songs off of retirement, which is really cool. But
it is really cool.
Sam,
The last,
he did very well for himself.
I don't know if you listen to the podcast, but that's the last episode we did, was a John Prine episode.
Oh, cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, we did Bruised Orange, Chain of Sorrow.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's cool, my buddy Matt, so he engineered John Prine with Dave Cobb at RCA Studio A in Nashville, Tree of Forgiveness, and Brandy Carlisle's record, Beat It Out. I mean, that Brandy Carlisle record is amazing, and I get why. So John Prine had come back to Memphis to the Sam Phillips recording service, and my buddy Jeff Powell cuts vinyl out of Studio B at this Memphis, or the Sam Phillips recording service, and Matt had arranged John Prine to come there, and Jeff cut the 2 songs that Sam Phillips recorded for John Prine. He made a special 45 for John Prine of those 2 songs that Sam had cut for Pink Cadillac, and made them like right there, cut a master acetate for John Prine. It's really cool.
That's really nice. And
also John Prine gave my buddy Matt Rossbang and 97 Cadillac Eldorado just for the hell of it. So
whoa,
he still he has it, and he's like, he drives it around all the time. It's like John Prine like really loves Cadillacs, and like had an extra one laying around. He's like, just told Matt one day, he's like, hey, it's like, you want this Cadillac? It's been sitting here for a while. And it's like, yeah, sure, I'll take a Cadillac from John Prine.
I'll take a John Prine Cadillac.
It's got a tape deck and everything. It's awesome.
That's really incredible.
Yeah, but yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much like, there's a whole lot more that goes into like, Sam, he didn't go into obscurity. He did like a lot of like, a lot of talks and a lot of like conferences about like his experience with the music industry, right, like, post his retirement, and his sons carried on his legacy at the studio. Then Roland James, who was Jerry Lee's guitar player, and he was also a session player at at the Sun Record Company forever. He took over the Sam Phillips Recording Service engineering and stuff like that. So it was kind of like in this weird way in the Sun family forever, really, then when then the Sun studio opened up in 1985. Actually, they opened up in like early 80s, like doing some like unofficial tours there. And it wasn't until the class of 55 sessions that was Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Roy Orbison came in and did a session there. And then that's what hold on, I got a cat that is in the way.
I had a dog scratching at the door earlier. I was like, just let it ride.
But and that's what brought our studio back out of obscurity. And then the U2 Rattle and Hum sessions happened in '87, and that's what really opened the floodgates for the Sun studio, when it became Sun Studio, being back as an active studio. And we have been an active studio consistently since 1985.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
yeah, I mean, we had a session in there last night. I don't know who recorded in there, but I mean, yeah, so it's as active as last night. So
That's really good. That's what like I loved about Sun Studios. It was just still active. Like when you go see Graceland, it's a little bit of a relic and it's sad, but like, Sun Studio still has a heartbeat. It, it's still turning.
it does, and it's such a. I mean, you can feel that energy in there, and it's like even when I go set up for a tour, it's like you have the room to yourself for a minute. It's like you can feel it.
That's what I was going to ask you. I have it written down. The only question I want to ask you really is like, how often do you go and stand in that room alone and just try to like absorb the history and what had happened there?
all the time. I mean, I go in there all the time. I'll play on the piano and write a little bit of stuff, or just, play some of my songs in there just to get my head right, and just like, then when you're doing that, you realize like, this is weird doing it in here.
That's great. It's got to be good luck.
Oh yeah, it's like I've had the pleasure of recording in that room more times than I can count, with various different bands, my own bands, and my own little video synth project. I've had the pleasure of doing stuff in there with, and it's been to be able to have that. That's one of the many perks of working at Sun's. Like you can record there basically for free if you're a tour guide. So my buddy Daniel
really cool.
Clark. It's awesome. He's the recording engineer, Daniel, up there, and he's like, I was telling him, like, hey man, you got anything this night? And he's like, no. It's like, can I do something in there? He's like, yeah, let's do it. So I was like,
well, I want to get to that. I want to get to you. So we'll do so usually we have a segment called 6 Degrees of Tommy Stinson, where our friend comedian Jeremy Essig will connect whoever we're covering to the basis of the replacements, and he can do it in less than 6 steps. But
nice.
He was really busy this week, and he also just said, just go watch the Elvis episode. I've already done it. But I do want to I do want to talk about you and have you promote yourself. But before we do that, Geoff, do you have a guilty pleasure song?
Oh, I've got so many. But there is one in particular that I would, I guess it's not really guilty pleasure, because I still love this band a lot. But it was like, I was thinking of one that's like not super guilty pleasure, but like one that's still pretty awesome. Growing up, when I was like 16 or 17, I was really into this band. It's like a prog rock emo band called Coheed and Cambria.
Yeah.
And it's still around.
Yeah.
One of my favorite bands of all time. And I didn't realize when I was listening to them that they were actually, it was the lead singer, Claudio Sanchez, was writing a concept record. Coheed and Cambria are characters in a science fiction story that he's been telling for throughout all of their records. They like this. I think the story is called the Amory Wars. So it's like a super weird, nerdy, like Blade Runner-esque kind of like Star Wars thing happening. But yeah, Coheed and Cambria are the characters in his story that he's telling, which I didn't know until after the fact. But they write, it's this like giant Hispanic guy with like this massive fro of hair playing like shredding like like Lamb of God type guitar playing. It's like insane. And they write such intricate like prog rock like stuff, but very catchy, because his voice is like kind of Geddy Lee-ish, but like its own entity, and he does all of his own harmonies and stuff. So I haven't listened to their most recent records, but like the first 3 I ever put out are like super dear to my heart. And there was one song in particular called The Suffering, and it's off of their 3rd record, which is called Good Apollo, I'll Be Burning Star 4, which is the lyric in there. It's called The Suffering, and it's by Coheed and Cambria, and it's like super bubblegum pop, but like also like real rock, and it's great. It's super yeah,
I'll have to listen to it. Coheed and Cambria is one of those bands. There were so many people around me at the time that I had similar music tastes that were listening to it, and I just never got there. I just never latched on. So now I'm really interested.
Yeah, like those first record, like the first one, Second Stage Turbine Blend, it's like it's a little it's definitely dated. It's really cool. It's kind of like more lo-fi, but I mean, there's some bangers on there. If you're like into like poppy prog, like sci-fi kind of stuff, it's killer. Their second record,
I might be.
Yeah,
I like White Fang. Would you consider that kind of in the same?
It can definitely be in the same vein. Yeah, yeah, like the in keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3. That record is amazing. That's my favorite record of all time with them. But yeah, like those first 3 records are stellar. And then you can, once you know that they're like, but the funny thing is, like in his lyrics, you don't know that he's talking about a science fiction, because like he even put out graphic novels, and I was like, I still don't know what's going on here. Like, he's done a really good job at like telling a story that is definitely complex, but it's also at the same time very brilliant, you know. So like knowing that aspect is like, that's a whole nother world right there. It's like, I'm going to be a badass musician that's going to write all of these killer albums, and it's also going to be a science fiction story. Like, okay, overachieve much, fine, whatever.
I like it. All right, before we let you go, first of all, thank you so much.
Yeah, this is
Thank
fantastic.
you all.
Really
Thank you so much, guys. It's my pleasure. Yeah.
Well, I want you to promote yourself, because I just saw on your Instagram page you have your fingers in a whole bunch of different projects.
Yeah.
So let's hear about them.
So I been in bands forever. My I guess my ride or die band I've been in for 15 years now. We're called Star and Micey, Micey. We've toured all around North America forever. We've got millions of streams on Spotify and Apple Music. We just started being a band again. One of my best friends, Nick, who used to work at Sun, he just moved back from Philly, and so now we can be a band again. So that's been a lot of fun. We actually played our first show in a year and a half, 2 weeks ago. That was great.
Great.
So we're looking to we'll start releasing some songs this year through some digital streaming platforms. But yeah, we don't really have any like records in the mix right now. Everyone's busy with families and jobs and stuff like that. And then I'm also in a band. A buddy of mine named Brandon Kinder has a solo project called The Wealthy West, and he's from Austin, Texas. He's called the Rocket Boys forever in Austin, and this is his solo project. So myself and some really close friends of mine in other bands here in Memphis were his backing band. We just released a song called Sleepwalking. If you type in Wealthy West on Spotify or Apple Music, I'm doing all the synth stuff on that song, which has been a lot of fun. So he's been releasing those songs, staggering them throughout the rest of the year. And then one of my favorite projects I've been a part of, it's a band I used to be in have been in on and off over the years. Some really dear friends of mine. The band is called Dream Crusher Hope Smasher. I love the band name, and it's like a synth power pop rock band that's like in line with like, it kind of has a oh my god, it's like Meatloaf meets Elton John meets Supertramp meets T-Rex meets
what
Pink Floyd.
What is happening? I have to hear this.
We haven't released anything yet, but if you type in, we're getting there. We got an EP coming out, and a buddy of mine is mixing all of it right now. But yeah, the band's called Dream Crusher Hope Smasher, and we hope to have some stuff out soon.
Great.
And I'm only playing synthesizers in this, and the other bands I play bass and sing. And this one I've been like just head over heels in love with like synthesis and synthesizers for the past like 4 or 5 years now, and have started I don't know if you've seen behind me, there's a lot going on behind me, and also started during 2020, that awesome year, I started a little pet project of mine called Campfires and Synthesizers, which is an ambient music project I started to basically highlight different synthesizers and effects pedals like next to a campfire, and it's like mostly like ambient type music. So I've been doing that for almost a year now, and it's gained a lot of traction, which has been a lot of fun. I've been in a little bit of a lull lately because of just life and bands starting up again, and so I'm trying to tonight I'm going to try to record a a new video and have it out. But I've been getting into like modular synthesis lately, which is insane because like, you know, it's such a money pit in a fun way. It's like, I mean, you can't take it with you, might as well spend money on something. So I've been really getting into that. And it's like, it's also another fun way to be creative musically, instead of like, you know, doing like the, you know, don't bore us, get to the chorus, like song structures. Like,
Yeah.
I'll just come up with like a few chords and just let the synthesizer or the effects pedal just go do its own crazy thing, and kind of let it become chaotic and also beautiful at the same time. So it's been a lot of fun. And there's a whole subculture of that all around the world with like, you know, I've gotten friends from, you know, from France, from Italy, from Germany, the Netherlands, Mexico. It's like they all do this kind of stuff, and they all, you know, it's such a supportive community, which is like, it's been really nice, you know, especially when you've been in a band element for so long, and then you know, come across this whole subculture of musicians that are doing the same thing. Definitely a lot better than what I'm doing. I'm just all learning curve for me, but it's pretty amazing. You know, there's a whole like community out there that does what I'm trying to do and have been trying to do for about a year now. So it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's called
Really cool.
Yeah, it's called Campfires and Synthesizers. I got a YouTube channel, and mostly I'm more present on Instagram, so you can definitely find me on there. And also all the bands that I mentioned, we have, you know, music out there to hear. So yeah, check us out if you dare.
We'll definitely spread the word for you too, man.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, best of luck to you guys. If you ever want to chat again, just holler at me.
Absolutely.
I'm not doing anything.
Go see Geoff up at Sun Studio. You're doing
I
everything.
think you're doing a lot.
I know, right? Lord, probably not gonna do anything tonight. Probably drink some whiskey. I think that's next in line for me. So
Sounds good. Yes, everybody. And if you go through Memphis, I will be so mad if you don't stop and go to Sun Studio and meet Geoff and have a tour and listen to all of his cool projects.
And go stand on the spot, for God's sake.
yeah, gotta go stand on the X.
All right, Geoff. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
All
Thanks,
right.
Geoff.
We'll
So nice to meet you all. Y'all take care, okay?
Thank
You too.
you. Bye.
Bye.
I think you did an amazing job.
Dude, yeah, it's so cool.
I would be playing in that. Like, I was so glad to see that he's like thrilled to be doing
yes,
it. That he is playing in the studio. Like, oh yeah, I go in there to write. Like, of course you do.
Of course I do. Or I was just like, oh, it's so great to see someone who's doing that and not just like, yeah, I give the same tour every day. No, he's just like, I am milking all of this. I'm absorbing all of what I get to do right here. That's really cool.
Some buildings are just alive. They just have their own energy, and you can feed off it if you allow yourself to. If you never get cynical about it. Like, the best thing about that guy was how excited he was. Like, I really enjoyed that he was as into it as he was, and that he was using it for his own art too.
Oh yeah.
Because that was kind of like, I had no idea what to expect with him. I thought, is this guy going to be like a musical historian, kind of geek? Is he going to be an older guy who's like, you know, just into Memphis history or something like that? I was thrilled to see that he was a musician who had just like, no, that's a job that it needs somebody who's going to be excited about it. It needs somebody who's going to have some energy, and also somebody who's going to enjoy all the perks.
Yep.
It's like, clear the place out, fire up the studio, bring in my boys.
Yes.
Here we go.
Let's do this. What a cool thing. What a cool guy. All right. Next week, I mean, the hits just keep coming for Corbin. Next week, we will be joined by comedian Nate Abshire. And I'm so excited because we were going back and forth trying to figure out what song that he wanted to do. And a lot of his favorite songs are also Corbin's favorite song. And then he just hit me with it yesterday. And he said, I'm going to do Lawyers, Guns, and Money by Warren Zevon. And I was
also
like,
one of my favorite songs. I'm really excited about this one too.
Ben's excited. Corbin's excited. I've heard the song. I'm not in the crazy Warren Zevon camp, but that doesn't mean I can't get there before next week. So, all right. I'm excited.
I'm going to be hard to deal with next week.
Oh, I'm excited. I guess we'll do this one at your house.
Yeah.
All right.
Deal. Are you ready?
I am ready.
And
Vogue.